really totally fascinating to me when I hope I'm not totally misrepresenting, but that's what I got out of it. And to me, that was this really amazing kind of liberating idea that I mean, this has been talked about recently quite a bit, but like this sort of idea of gay pride and the sort of burden of assimilation and happiness. So it's interesting. So what I did is I just photographed all these objects that I felt like in my life held a kind of energy, or that they were the portrait of something that was kind of beyond me, if that makes sense. So this is literally just this strange old little bank it's a piggy bank that I own that I found in a thrift store. And so its origin is, it has a little tag on it. It says novelty gift for men. So a wife would buy it and give it to her husband as a joke. And then, he'd put it on his dresser, and then he'd put all his money in it because, she's like taking his, it's her, I don't have to explain it, right? It's stupid. But to me, it's totally queer. Like, it's this really kind of beautiful kind of lesbian object. And I think there's like one more. And then I just want to say something about this. So this is like my original copy of Sisterhood is Powerful, which I read like 8 times in college. And so this one's called Sisterhood Rebound. And so, again, I just sort of, there's a lot of these. I made a lot of these photographs, and I think I'm just going to end it there and have you sort of talk a little bit about your book.
Yeah. So can we go back to One Love Leads to Another? Because that's an image that I have meditated on quite a bit. So I thought we were going to talk about feelings until the end, but already it can't be helped. Because I indeed set out to write about feelings, to write about trauma, but also about the ordinary feelings that get attached to what sometimes gets called trauma in the book that came to be called Archive of Feelings. The category of the archive came somewhat belatedly to that project as I thought about how we collect feelings or store them or save them. Sometimes we want to get rid of them, but we also hang on to loss or to feelings of sadness, which I think is also why we hang on to stuff. And as you say, in Archive of Feelings, I was eager to not pathologize those forms of loss or mourning or hanging on to things. And so I probably wanted to, among other things, figure out a way to justify my own collecting tendencies. And one of the reasons I got to the archive actually was because of the film Watermelon Woman. So it's kind of amazing that Cheryl Dunye is sitting here. I just did a presentation on the new project that's been inspired, among other things, by this image, by also showing an image of the collaborative work that Cheryl did with Zoe Leonard to create the Faye Richards photo archive that became part of the fake archive that produced the narrative of Faye Richards, who is a fictional persona that the character Cheryl in the auto-documentary Watermelon Woman tries to research. One of the places that she goes to do that research is the Lesbian History Archives in Brooklyn. And thanks to that film, I don't think I'd been to the Lesbian History Archives before I saw Watermelon Woman. And I found myself turning to the archive. It kept coming up, LHA kept coming up in the work that I was doing. And I got really interested in the ways in which a bunch of lesbians had legitimated collecting stuff because someone like Joan Nessel said anything a lesbian has ever touched is worth saving. And I was also interested in the question of the absent archive. What happens if there's histories you want to know and you can't find them? For example, the history of black lesbians or players in Hollywood cinema, or even in famous times and places like 1920s Paris, trying to figure out who those lesbians were and what they were doing in their private life and so on. all roads kind of took me to the archive as a way of thinking about feelings. So I was not only excited that you named a show after my book, but when I saw the show, felt compelled to write about it. This is another example of the way in which these conversations go back and forth, because I felt like you were doing something visually that was very near and dear to me in the work of trying to archive feelings. And this image called One Love Leads to Another is a good example of that, of a kind of documentation of a musical subculture, the ways in which we save stuff, the ways in which different media morph over time. So the cassette tape and the cassette tape that one makes for others, or the mixtape, is a genre that's disappearing over time. But for me, really, among other things, this counts as an archive of feelings because it says friendship and the connections we make with one another through making music, through passing music along, matter and are important. So it's funny to me that you say that the images in Archive of Feelings were somewhat clinical or detached from the feelings or circumstances of their production, because for me they felt very enabling of the ways in which you just took photographs of these objects. And for me there's also something very important about using the work of photography to archive these objects that might otherwise seem kind of inconsequential. So I've been writing about this project as one where photographing objects becomes a form of archival practice, made me feel like the stuff I collect or the feelings attached to objects could be archived just by virtue of making a photograph, and whether someone understood it or not, it mattered. Like, you stuck it on the gallery wall, and it said these personal feelings are important enough to be made public. So I love that about this project, and it has been tremendously generative for me over the last few years. There's a long piece coming out in a book called Feeling Photography that looks at Archive of Feelings, along with a more recent project by Zoe Leonard called Analog, which is a series of photographs of storefronts and locations in New York City. That's an attempt, among other things, to document a disappearing New York City, the Lower East Side neighborhoods and so on that have been queer art neighborhoods. It is also a document of loss from AIDS and of different generations of artists and their intersection with the landscape of a place like New York City. And for reasons which I think will also come up again, the pairing of those two artists was quite significant for me, and also has made me think a lot about artists as archivists, which I think is might be another theme for our conversation this evening, and has actually taken me back to archives in order to think about what's going on with LGBT archives right now, sexuality archives, their place within a shifting and changing queer and feminist landscape. So that's more about archive than about feeling, but I think we'll twist them into one another. So maybe, yeah, let's keep on the archive theme, because working on this more recent project one of the archives I've gone to and been very interested in is the fact that alongside of ongoing projects like the Lesbian History Archives in Brooklyn are newer archival collections like the Fails, which holds some of Tammy Rae's material.
Yeah.